Hey, everybody, it's me, John Ward. I am back with another One Filmmaker, One Film. And today my guest is
Joe Sherlock. I'm a filmmaker based in Oregon. I like to say I'm in my third decade of making this stuff. It was 95. So this is the 26th year of making lo-fi independent horror stuff. So I like 95, I started working on a thing called Dimension of Blood that got distribution through Draculina magazine and stuff like that. And then I just kept making stuff. I did a bunch of stuff with director John Bowker. The Evil Maker series is probably the biggest one he was directing. I was shooting and producing. And then I've done a bunch of my own stuff. Drifter, Beyond the Wall of Fear, Blood Creek Woodsman, Odd Noggins. My latest one was Channel 99. I also was a co-producer in The Deeper Manos Returns, which was the sequel to Manos and Hands of Fate that came out a few years ago. So yeah, lots of stuff, and love doing this, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So because you're not just a filmmaker, because you're also a musician. You have your own band. And what's that?
I have a band with my friends and our sons called Zip Squid. We play kind of garage band rock. I've been in a bunch of garage bands with this friend of mine, Rob Miracle, who also does effects for a lot of my movies and has acted in a lot of them. And then I do a lot of music for my making music Mac and garage band, and I like doing the music, and I do illustration too. I don't know if that's where you were going or not, but also an artist. So
yeah, that was my next thing, is that Joe is also an artist, and I saw some of his art on Facebook, and I asked him, hey, would you be willing to, do a poster for me for the first Aximus movie? And he did. And so this is, if I can get this right here, there we go. So that's the poster for, for Aximus, and trying to get it in there. It's that background that kills me. And then and then when I did Aximus 2, Joe once again did, oh, there we go. That doesn't look too bad. The poster for part 2. So a lot of you guys have seen this on Facebook and stuff. And so he is the official artist for the Aximus films. So I really like his
I'll
art.
take it.
Yeah. Oh, you are. I like having official people for things. So
Awesome. Cool.
So you're definitely the guy for that. And if I ever need music, I'll give you a call too. So
Never know.
Always want to give people that I like, somewhere in a film, with music or a poster or something like that. So overall with yourself, plus you've also worked with like David Sterling, you've worked with you're on SOV horror, you're on, you're on a lot of stuff. Right. I mean, you've been out there for, how many films do you think you've made?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I get that asked that often. For the longest time, what I did was I said I was involved in 30 features and anthologies. But honestly, that was like 10 years ago. I mean, now it's more around 40, maybe 50 if you count stuff I did little pieces of. Because I would do, there's films I wrote and directed or produced. And there's a lot of films that I've done pieces of, like anthologies that I've done a segment for. There's, I don't know, I even know how many, 10 or 12 easily, where I've done like a third of the movie, or sometimes it's like maybe a 10-minute, 15-minute short. But, I count that. That's a movie I worked on. I didn't do the whole thing. So it's sort of a nuanced answer. It's like, well, if you count, this, it's this. If you count this. So I just sort of rounded up. I'm like, 40 or 50. If you go to my website, actually, if you go to skullfaceastronaut.com, the first page just has this massive stack of cover art. And each one of those clicks to a page that talks about me, and it talks about what I did on it. So, you can kind of poke around and say, oh, he just did a story for this anthology, or this one, oh, he actually did the whole thing. It's a good repository for all that stuff.
Well, and I've interviewed now a few filmmakers that are part of my anthology, Reign of Vibrant Screams, and Joe has a short in that too. And how long you shoot stuff very quickly. How long did it take you to shoot that short?
Well, it's all relative, right? I mean, shooting quickly. Yeah, sometimes I shoot stuff quickly, but project long time, and because I'm shooting in bits and pieces because of scheduling with people, corralling. Most of my movies are done with friends and friends of friends. And as the years have gone on, as I started doing screenings, maybe about 15 or so years ago, like at theater pubs and then some conventions and things like that, I've met people through that where, they say, hey, I'd like to be in your next movie, or this sounds fun, I'd like to do something. So the circle has expanded a bit. But to be honest, most of the people I'm working with are not necessarily actors as a profession. And so, they've mostly got day jobs or sometimes, night jobs or whatever. Anyways, scheduling is usually a big issue, and a lot of shooting in pieces. So I might shoot fast and get a whole bunch of stuff done in a day. I just shot yesterday. I shot the last sequence for an upcoming for Dark Zone 13 Part 2 that I'm working on. I shot the last sequence, and I mean, it was 13 hours. I mean, from when I left the house and got home, it was about 13 hours. But I got it all done, and it's going to be about 15 minutes. So that is a lot to shoot in a day, all over a whole bunch of different rooms in this house and stuff. So yeah, I was, moving fast. But that I've been working on that project since January. So it's all in little pieces. All right. So to answer your question, though, the story, which is the story, I'm looking at the title. Sorry, Rain of Vibrant Screams. My story is Crimson Eye of the Nameless, which is Lovecraftian inspired, and I've got some Lovecraftian tropes in it. There's a story called Beyond the Wall of Sleep that I really like, and that was inspiration for it. But there's also an old 70s sci-fi movie called Eyes Behind the Stars, which is a UFO movie, actually, that I sort of like parts of, and in particular like the way they did the sound work on it. And so those are the two influences in coming up with that story. I shot that in so the bulk of it I shot on one day, and then later went back and did some more stuff on maybe part of another day.
Okay. And it's
like one long day and then a shorter day.
And the way, and I just got to remember the way that we kind of met was, I think it might have been through David Sterling, because I came with him with a story idea where I said, I want to make this film called Astronaut Skeleton. And it's like first man, into space and the incredible melting man. And it's an astronaut with and he's got the skull inside that's melting inside the astronaut helmet. And he's like, well, that's funny because I know this guy named Joe Sherlock, and his company is called Skullface. I'm confusing it with my own title. So say yours.
Yeah, it's Skullface Astronaut. Yeah, you got
Skullface Astronaut. Yeah, so Skullface Astronaut with Astronaut Skeleton. There we go. And I messaged you a couple times about it because I was actually a little afraid that, oh no, he might be ripping my company off, and it's like, no, I like these movies and I wanted to make them. And that's how we kind of connected, and then just, communicated from there, out. So I thought that was kind of funny.
And you told me your story idea, and my whole thing was like, I had a movie idea way back when, and it was inspired by Incredible Melting Man. And as a code, I didn't know what the title was going to be, but just I had to label the file that I had been typing up, and I called it Skullface Astronaut just because that would tell me later, oh, that's what that story is, right? Figuring that's not the title, but I just to label it something. And then I never made that movie. I never even wrote that script, but that phrase was hanging around in my head for all those years. And so, yeah, I used to be Dr. Squid. I mean, I still am, I suppose, but that used to be my website. And so when I decided a few years back to kind of revamp everything, that's the name I chose. But so it was a similar inspiration to your idea, and our stories are actually similar. So I thought that was quite cool to bond over that.
Yeah, I just got a little paranoid with it. I've gotten paranoid a couple times with probably a total 3 things I've gotten paranoid about, where it's like, maybe I should reach out and say something so nobody thinks I'm ripping them off. So right. But today we are here to discuss one of my favorite films that you made, which is called Blood Creek Woodsman. We'll get there we go. Right. And this copy is actually even signed. It's signed by you right up there. And I think this is
All
one of
right.
the first films I bought from you. And how can you go wrong with this cover? I mean, where are we at here? There we go. I mean, that's,
What's
we
up on
got
there?
hot girl there, girl in lingerie, girl screaming with blood. I mean, you can't go guy with gun. You can't go wrong with that. You got the killer up
Top of the
there.
gun, right? Yeah.
Oh, and then we got the back there
Yeah.
with the pretty much naked chick
Yeah.
there too. So, um, so what is, um, how did you come up with this idea? When did you come up with this idea for the film?
So, I actually was, so I watched this earlier today and I wanted to make up I made some notes as far as the timeline for it. So this isn't exactly answering that question, but I did write down a bunch of notes on how the production and post-production, everything went. But so to answer your question specifically though, my friend John Bowker, who I've known since middle school, and is a filmmaker, writer and filmmaker in his own right. I worked on a lot of his projects. I worked on all his projects except one. So we, in the early 2000s, we were making movies together and apart, sort of leapfrogging. It was a crazy time. And then in 2009, the end of 2008, he had written this script called Evil Rising, and wanted to make that in January. So we started in January of 2009 till April. We shot this movie called Evil Rising. Then in June of 2009, he said, "Hey, I want you. How about if we co-produce and you direct and shoot a body count movie? I've always wanted to do a body count movie, and I've started writing this one called Blood Creek Woodsman." And he's like, "Let's shoot it at the end of the summer." I'm like, "Okay." So John wrote the story, and basically, as he has told it a few different times, he had done a lot of movies that had supernatural elements, The Evil Maker and things like that, and ghosts and things like that, but he hadn't done sort of a straight out slasher, like he calls it, a body count movie. And so he just wanted to. He loves those movies. He loves all kinds of movies, but likes Friday the 13th and all those slasher movies. So it was the idea to do his own take on the slasher movie. And so in June, he said, "Hey, let's make this." So 2 months later, 2 months of pre-production on that thing, we shot for 10 days in a row in August. People took off time of work, and actually Tom Stedman, who plays the sheriff, flew out from Alabama, and we shot for 10 days straight. Then in the fall 2009, we shot another few weekends, some big scenes. So early in 2010, shot a few more pieces of it. And then, so John's plan was he was going to edit Blood Creek Woodsman after he finished editing Evil Rising, which he never actually finished. So he was, so needless to say, Blood Creek Woodsman just sat on the sidelines waiting to be edited for several years. And I moved on and was making new stuff. And John just kind of mired down and trying to get Evil Rising done. So finally, 2012, okay, so 3 years later, my friend Mike Haig says, "Hey, I got this equipment. I'm offering my help to get Blood Creek Woodsman cut together," because he had helped out on a lot of the shoots, doing sound and all kinds of stuff, and he wanted to see it done. And at the time, I really wasn't set up to do bigger projects like that, just equipment wise. And John was like, "Yeah, that's great, because I'm still trying to figure this other one out. Go for it." So my friend Mike lives in Portland, about 2 hours away from me. So basically, for an entire year, once a month, I would drive up to Mike for the weekend, and we'd edit the movie, and then I'd come home. So it took us like a year to get the rough cut together. We showed it at Crypticon Seattle Horror Convention. I can look at my notes here. In 2013. That's the spring in 2013. And then after that, there was all kinds of work getting DVD extras together and some sound fixes. So finally, the November of 2014, got it out on DVD. So there's the long story of the production and the post-production. But yeah, the initial idea was John's, and it was his idea. Like, I want to do a movie. So he took familiar horror tropes that he loved and that people would expect, tried to put a little bit of a twist on it. I think because I was making it, or I was directing it, I injected probably more quirky humor and a little, weird stuff like that. And plus, I think I do have a shooting style in terms of the look and feel of things. So I think I brought that to, his script. Certainly, if he had directed it, it would have been a different movie.
So, was the Blood Creek Woodsman, was that always the title? Because that's a pretty cool title. Like,
It was. Oh, let me tell you. Yeah, there's a story behind that. So years earlier, I had made an anthology called Trailer Park Double Wide Trilogy of Terror, which was 6 short stories. And one of the stories was about a B-movie film reviewer who gets invited to the set of a local filmmaker. A local filmmaker is making a horror movie, and he invites this newspaper critic, to come to the set to see how things are done. And then, of course, things go horribly wrong. But anyway, in that story, at one point they're on the set and they're shooting a scene where this girl gets attacked, and she gets kind of choked by this killer in a Halloween mask, and she has fake blood in her mouth, and so she just shakes her head around, blood comes out of her mouth, and it's kind of goofy and cliche. And so the critic is standing next to the effects guy watching this being shot, and he makes a comment. He goes, that's just like the scene in the Blood Creek Woodsman. And then the effects guy says, yeah, this director's pretty derivative. So that was in my short. I totally made that Blood Creek Woodsman title up out of my head. It was like I needed the name of a movie that this critic would reference, like, oh, that's just like their movie. And so I made up that title. And so a few years later, when John was talking about this slasher, that's probably 8 years later. Anyway, he said, I want to use that title that you had in Trailer Park Trilogy, Blood Creek Woodsman. Can I use that? I'm like, sure, man, you can use that. So that's where the title came from.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
started as a fake movie reference, and then it became a real movie.
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that does happen. So, which is always great to see. Now I'm going to ask you. So, what was the budget, do you think, on the film?
By the time we got all done with it, it was a few $1,000s. It wasn't a lot. Most of my stuff, the bulk of the money goes towards special effects, food's the biggest one, food, special effects, props, supplies, etc. We try to pay people a little bit or give them gas money as we can. But it was a few $1,000s all told.
Yeah, because this isn't just some cheapy 70-minute slasher film that, somebody shot on their phone. I mean, it's 90 minutes and it's very professional. I mean, good sound, good picture, good editing, good soundtrack. I really like that.
I think the thing that's remarkable about it to me is, at the time, the production value is like jumped 1,000,000 points from what we had been doing previously, because pretty much we were shooting in our own homes, other people's apartments and homes, or in the woods, or the local park, whatever. This one, he wrote it in to have, like, you got a sheriff's department. So the restaurant and the bar that we shot in, I have a friend that I went to high school with who owned that restaurant, a restaurant and bar, and I had already shot a movie there called Underbelly. So back in 2001, 2002, I shot this thriller movie called Underbelly, and so my friend Richard, he owned the restaurant with a bar, and then across the parking lot was a small house that he lived in, so he owned that too. So for Underbelly, we shot in the house, a whole bunch of stuff all over the place there, and then in the restaurant and in the bar. So knowing that, John wrote a bunch of scenes like that because he knew we could have the run of this restaurant and bar either early in the morning or late at night after they closed. So that that's just not a location you can't just that brings it up a level than just shooting in your garage, right? So we had a real bar. Through Richard, we actually got connected with some other locations around town. One of his regulars at the bar, his business, he was retired, but what he did in retirement was he would buy decommissioned police cars and he'd strip them and paint them up, fix them up, and just sell them as used cars. So he had a whole storage thing on his property full of police light bars that go on top of the cars, because he would just strip them off and put them in a pile, right? So we were able to get a couple cars and some light bars and make up our own police cars.
Oh, nice.
So that brought the production value up a bit. There's a lake in the movie, which we found through another connection with someone, that was just beautiful. And I mean, the location was beautiful. The inside of this cabin, I think they either built it or they decorated it in the 70s, and then they never touched it again. So it had macrame on the walls, it had orange shag carpet, it had green appliances, avocado appliances. So it just had a lot of character right out of the gate. So a combination of all that stuff, I think just really brought up the production value on it. We, did a lot of, my friend Rob Miracle did a lot of the effects, and we had a lot of locations that we had free reign in. And yeah, so I think that's what makes it different. Even today, I'm still like, on Sunday, I shot at someone's house. I wrote the story to be, it's all about people, a woman who rents a room in a boarding house. So it all makes sense. But sometimes if you shoot in an office, a business, a restaurant, whatever you might have, it brings it up a different level than just shooting in your friend's apartment.
Yeah, I find it funny that you see these kind of like indie micro budget films, and you can always tell it's the director's apartment, because it's supposed to be like two girls live there. There's no way these girls live there. I mean, this is so obviously the director's apartment. I mean, they're not going to have up, Jason Voorhees posters, and it's just like,
right.
So it's nice to have like real places that aren't, that would just scream, this is a film friend's house or something, or apartment. So with the,
True.
so if you don't,
true.
If you don't mind, so let's go a little more into pre-production, and you can be detailed. What was the pre-production time on this like?
Well, we had about 2 months. Like I said, I think it was June when he first talked to me about it, and we shot in August. Maybe, I don't remember the dates exactly. About 2 months was basically pre-production, which is not much. I mean, I say that because it's like, wow, that's not much time. But a bar and the house, right? So we knew that already. And he had actually, we had shot something else at that cabin on the lake. We had shot a little piece of an anthology there. So he knew that was available. And a lot of the people in the movie were people we'd worked with before. However, when you start adding in all the victims, it was a lot bigger cast than usual. So that part of pre-production really, getting all the casting done. One thing that happened was, I'm trying to think if it was that year or the year before. I think it was that year. We had gone to this Crypticon horror convention in Seattle, and there was a short film being shown there, and there were a bunch of actors who were in it that met us and were like, oh yeah, we'd love to do this stuff. We'd love to do, be in your movies. And actually there was a guy, so Adam, who plays the Blood Creek Woodsman, was actually a friend of Rob's, who did the effects, but he was also involved with this short film that was being shown there. So for anyone who's seen the movie, there's a sequence we call the party house, where there's like these 6 young people hanging, split off to make out. And of course it's a horror movie, so they get killed. Right. Yeah. But like, those people were almost all those people were from this group that we met at the convention. Adam, I had met at the convention. I mean, Rob knew him, but I hadn't met him till the convention. And then there was another sequence with a couple that were actors we met at this convention. So that was sort of neat, that, we met these people. That was in May. And so then when John was writing the script, which he writes fast. I mean, it was June when he asked me about it, right? So he probably banged the bulk of this out in a month or so. He had those people in mind for parts. In fact, one girl was a leader and kind of a contortionist. And so when we were hanging out with them, she was showing off how she could turn around and backwards and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote that into the script because he knew she could do that, because she was just goofing around at the convention doing that. So there was that. Now, what I do, when I had worked on John's movies, he'd give me the script, and I'd give him a few, tips or whatever, not tips, but sometimes I'd be like, oh, why don't you change this? Or why don't we, do this instead? often thinking towards the production. So with this one, I don't know that I did it that much because I think he got to the point where he realized, kind of things that were difficult to shoot and I wouldn't write those things. But I would storyboard a lot. I didn't storyboard every single thing, but I would storyboard a lot. Now for John, a lot of times that was because I would need to communicate to him, like, this is what I'm thinking. Is this what you're thinking? But since I was directing it and shooting it, I didn't have to do that as much. But a lot of times I would still do storyboards to show the actors, because I find that it would help the actors get a sense of what I was asking for. If I could just show them a picture, say, you're going to be over here, you're over here, and see this thing, this is what you're going to do. And then, you move this arrow means you're going to go over here, or, this is the angle and here's where the axe comes in, or whatever it might be. Just sometimes it's helpful for the actors to see that storyboard as well, to know what all that I'm. The other thing, sometimes I'm like, I'm only seeing this much, so it doesn't matter where your knees are, or just something goofy like that. Like, don't worry about this. This is what's in my frame. So all you need to worry about is about this, and that's helpful sometimes too, because they're like, it's less for them to think about, so they can concentrate. Oh yeah, he's only seeing my head and shoulders, so that's all. Like, I can concentrate on the performance. So storyboarding is a lot of that pre-production. Obviously, we had to get the casting done, and just sort of planning the the shooting schedule, trying to plan it as efficiently as possible, because you're always balancing. Here's the location. It'd be great to set up in this location to shoot everything we need there, because we only set up once, right? However, sometimes you've got different actors that can't make it all the time. So, all right, well, maybe we have to shoot there twice, and then sometimes you have to add in costume changes too. It's like, well, if we shoot here, they have to change costumes 5 times. Is that worth it? Or should we instead, pick up and move over here and then move back? So it's balancing all those things to try to make it as efficient possible, because I don't want, people that are in the movies that I make, I mean, they want to be there, and I want them to feel like I'm respecting their time, because they're, helping out make this, create this thing, right? So, the thing I want them is for them to be sitting around too much feeling like, they're spinning the wheels. So if I can be as efficient as possible, then, we all get to make cool stuff, but we all can go home in a decent hour. So, which doesn't always work out, but you try. So that's a big part of it too, for me, is going through the script, trying to figure out, how is this going to work with locations. The other thing was, like I said, Tom Stedham flew out from Alabama to play the sheriff. So we knew, okay, he's only here for this stretch of time. We got to get everything with him shot then. So, that was part of it, figuring out, okay, here's everything we have to shoot in that time. This other stuff we could shoot later. I know we did it. We actually, there were several sequences that we shot that he wasn't in, but we shot him because that location was where it happened, or, whatever. So, and the one thing was, there are small bits, like there's a scene where the sheriff talks to, it's at like a little old country store, and the sheriff meets the bartender, and they, he's like, hey, how you doing? They shake hands, and the bartender makes some note about how he's buying extra ammunition. And the only reason that is in there is because Richard, who's the guy that owned the restaurant stuff, he said, we should just drive around. So the other scene I was going to talk about, there's an exterior shot when the sheriff pulls up to the sheriff's office. It's a white building, and they've got hanging flowers in front of it. And that's a shot I was going to do later. I was like, okay, yeah, we'll do that later. And I was just going to have him pull up in front of some building in the town where I live, or something. Maybe I hadn't even planned it out. I just knew it was, trying to figure out, what do we have to get done? Oh, we can get that shot later. And he was like, well, we should drive around. There's some cool stuff. Maybe this would be a good thing to shoot in front of. So we drove around, and once he showed, that was like the city hall in Mount Angel. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great looking building. Yeah, let's just, because all he had to do was pull up, walk upstairs and go in the door, and then turn around and come back, right? Because the interiors we were going to shoot elsewhere on a different day. So, that was cool, because it was another location. It looked a little different. But on that same trip, driving around, where he was like, well, there's this place, you could shoot here, you could shoot here, we came upon that store, that general store, and we made up that scene on the spot. Because I'm like, yeah, this is cool. This is like old country store, and all the wood's all falling apart, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And so we just did that scene to take advantage of that location. It has nothing to do with the plot. And actually, The bartender says, he's buying shells for old, which is the name he gave his rifle, right? There's no payoff to that. Like if you're expecting the bartender later to pull out old Betsy from behind the bar, it doesn't happen. But the reason is because we just made that scene up to take advantage of the location. And when I was editing with Mike, he and I argued about it quite a bit because of that. He's like, there's no reason for this to be in the movie. There's no payoff. That reference doesn't go anywhere. But I insisted on putting it in there just because it lent to the character of the town and the vibe of the movie of like small town, out in the boonies. So anyway, that was what the heck quite answering. I guess you're talking about pre-production. I jumped into production, but anyway, pre-production. Yeah. It's planning to be efficient, but there's this instance where, there's a little variance on what we ended up shooting, but yeah, I don't know, we knew we only had Tom for a certain amount of time. So then, like I said, we had already planned we're going to shoot stuff in the fall that didn't involve that character. And then that bled a little bit into the beginning of next year. I don't know. That's probably all I can say about pre-production, I guess.
Well, okay, because so now production, which you've already talked about. Is there anything else you could talk about about production?
Actually, this actually goes back to production a little bit in terms of the effects. Rob Miracle is our effects guy, and obviously there's a lot of kills in the movie, and so we already had a fake axe. It was a foam rubber axe head on a real axe handle that Rob originally made for the Evil Maker series. So we had used that in movies after that, and actually after that I've used it in movies. So that was the axe. And then there were a whole bunch of guts he had to make. Like he made foam latex guts, and all kinds of fake blood. There was so some of that stuff he could do ahead of time. A few other things like so jumping back to production, those 10 days were pretty grueling sometimes, and we were pretty good for most of the shoot. But I do remember there was one day when I was carrying some foam. I'm trying to think what the heck the deal. I think we had these big, thick sheets of foam for stunts, like there were people to fall on, and I was bringing them from one building to another, and they got under my feet, and I tripped and I fell on this gravel walkway, and I jammed a rock into the palm of my hand.
Oh.
And yeah, it was a little shot. I mean, all of a sudden I was on the ground. I was like, holy ow. And there was this rock in my hand. So I went in the house and I grabbed some paper towels and I shoved them in there, and I wrapped my hand in gaffer's tape and had that on for a couple days just to keep moving forward. And I don't know if it was that day or not, but there was another day where we ran really behind. And I was sort of freaking out that one night because I was like, oh my God, we have so much left to do. And finally, John was like, look, let's, this is crazy. We can't be here till 2 a.m. We've got to start again at 9 a.m. the next day or something. We got to shuffle things around. And so luckily, Bryn in particular, we had a bunch of scenes with her, and I don't know if she was going to be finished that day or she was going to come back like later, but I just felt bad because I couldn't get her stuff done. But she came over, she's like, it's okay, yeah, let's figure it out, we'll make it work. So we did have to rearrange some things. It still had to be within that 10-day range before Tom flew back home, but managed to do that. But other than that, I think we were pretty good in terms of what I had figured we could shoot each day. We managed to get done. I mentioned the police cars. That was really cool. The sheriff's star that's on the door of the police cars, I had just designed that and had it printed out on 2 big 11x17, like half of it on 11x17 color photocopies. And then I cut it out and taped it together, and then I had that laminated and trimmed that out. And then I duct taped some flat refrigerator magnets to the back of it. So you could just slap it on the side of the car and it would stay there. And so we used that on the sheriff's rig, which was actually Mike's car. But then also we could take it off there, and then we could slap it on the side of this police car that was one of the decommissioned police cars that we put a light bar back on top of and put some vinyl lettering on the side. I guess that was pre-production, making that star so we could slap it on different cars as we needed to. which I actually have done on subsequent movies, because right now I think it's stuck on a freezer in my garage, so I could still grab that and throw it onto a car.
Yeah, you can't throw
But
that
as far as
stuff
the
away.
effects go, so I know, right? I got it now. I got to use it. Yeah, so there was a lot of effect stuff figuring out. There was a whole sequence where this guy gets chainsawed in half, and that was quite an ordeal. We had full run of this one guy's house, and he had a garage that had a workshop attached to it. But in the garage part, they had stored stacks and stacks and stacks of wood, and so we were going to do this thing where he gets chainsawed, and so Rob built a fake torso out of foam, and we had this whole gag rigged up where the guy was going to get pushed on. There was some metal tubes sticking out of the stack of wood, and he would get pushed onto them, so they'd poke through his chest, so he'd be stuck there. And then the woodsman would chainsaw him at the waist, so the bottom half of his body would fall down, but the top half was stuck to these metal rods. And so a couple things. One was, when we'd actually shot a whole movie there before at this location, so we knew it inside and out. But we hadn't shot in that garage, and when we got there, we found out, oh, that wood is like reclaimed wood from an old barn that we're going to use for something. So like you can't get blood on it. So all these plans of like having this stuff happen around the stacks of wood was like, oh no. So when you watch the movie, that's why there's all these sheets of plastic in there. That was actually a practical concern to cover up the wood so it wouldn't get stained with the fake blood. I don't think anybody thinks twice about it, but I always find it interesting. Like you were going to ask me about like talk about a production where you had a problem and you had to solve it. Well, that's one, right? All of a sudden we're like, oh no, you mean we can't get any of this stuff that's being set for this whole scene? So we cover it with plastic, but anyways, but I really like that sequence. But we had to build the fake torso out of foam so the metal rods could stick through it. Rob did that, and then built a fake bottom half so that he could pile up some guts and fake blood on the top of it, and then we just tipped it over so it fell onto the ground. And when the legs and pelvis fell onto the ground, all the intestines, I guess is what they're supposed to be, sort of splattered out. And I love that shot. That when I've shot this in public, I mean, that shot always gets a big cheer. And the other thing that gets a cheer is there's a scene where Bud's wife gets attacked in the shower, and a similar thing. She gets chainsawed, but we don't actually show it. We cut away to her legs, and you just see all her innards fall down to her feet. And that was one of the later things that we shot. We might have even shot that at the beginning of 2010. That might have been the very last bits we did. But that was basically all the leftover pieces that Rob had from the main production. So he had made intestines and other little foam latex parts, and then he kind of had all wraps that he trimmed the pieces out of. And so he basically had this bag of scraps, and so he put the bag of scraps in a bowl and he poured fake blood in it and mixed it all up, and that's what we dumped on her feet to be the guts coming out. So it was actually just kind of leftovers of stuff. So that was cool. The other cool thing production wise was when we did there's a girl that gets sawed in half in a yard, and we shot the scenes where she gets chased at one location, and then months later, I dug a hole in my backyard and I buried the bottom half of this acne. So she's, it's just the top half of her laying out there. And then we put a pile of fake guts at her waist to do that shot where someone comes upon the half of her body. And then my dog walk over and start chewing on him. And that always gets a rise too. And that was funny. Simple, if you think about it, that's a simple effect. It's not very complicated to do, but boy, that gets a reaction. So,
well, with the
so anyway, so like I said, we shot in August for 10 days straight. Then in I think September and October, we did several like all day. One time it was like an all night shoot, and then 2010 shot a few more things, kind of the last pickups.
Yeah, with the with like that barn, once the actor walked up to those like metal poles, I'm like, foreshadowing, something's gonna happen with those bars. And so, which is
Yes,
actually one of
yes.
my questions that I wrote down while watching the film is, since these are real locations, how much blood could you get on them, or just no blood at all?
Well, let me think. I mean, I watched the movie today too. I'm trying to think through all the kills. Um, uh, okay, the barn one, like the barn one, we had to cover up all the wood, right? So, and we got blood all over the ground, but it wasn't on the wood that they were worried about. Um, the scene where the girl gets attacked in the shower, I actually taped a couple trash bags on the ceiling because we were the way we were doing that was I had the frame above her waist, and the idea was the chainsaw was slicing below the frame. And so Rob had rigged up a super soaker. I mean, he literally had one of these big giant super soakers, all bright plastic colors, and he had mixed up a variation of the watery knife to go on the logging site sequence. We used the super soaker a lot, and so for the shower scene, he was just sort of down by the ground, and as soon as the girl screamed, he squirted the blood at her, and so that splattered. Actually, when you watch the film, it doesn't look like it went very far, or there was that much, but there were tiny droplets of blood everywhere in that bathroom. I felt really bad. That was Mike's bathroom. So Mike, the guy that did sound for the movie, and then years later said, "Hey, let me help you edit it." That was his bathroom, and so yeah, despite my trap on the ceiling, blood got everywhere. We were cleaning stuff up, and for years he would say, "Oh yeah, there's still some blood there." And years later, he had that whole bathroom redone. And when they were redoing, he found some more blood splatters. So there's a scene in that where I pan along the carpet and you see the bloody footprints of the Woodsman. That was just on a carpet remnant that I had in the garage for just such an occasion. But that's the thing. I've gotten carpet remnants from a couple different friends of mine, and I just stashed them in the garage for when I need to do something where there's blood on a carpet. And so that's what that was. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, a lot of the kills end up happening outside. There's the campfires, the cabin, and everything like that. There's this, the scene where there's a young couple and the guy gets killed at the back sliding glass door, and there, blood gets splattered all over the door. That was my house, but of course that's outside. So I don't know. I mean, just in general, usually if you're not killing someone outside, or you can't do it in a bathtub where that the cleanup's really easy, right? You just got to lay down lots of plastic and then, be ready to clean up stuff as soon as possible. I mean, it's a good question because, the real locations, you got to be careful. I mean, Lloyd Kaufman famously he puts up during his productions that, and I can't remember all of it, but it's something like, be very respectful of people and respectful of the place or something like that, which is true. It's like, if you want to, this is great to be able to shoot here. And if I want to shoot here again, I got to, not mess it up.
Right. No, that makes total sense. So it's it's sometimes like I couldn't tell in this film, but there are definitely other films. There's a zombie film called Office of the Dead. It's normally part of like a collection of films, and it's on there. It's Asian, but I don't think it wasn't made overseas or anything. But you could tell they shot in a real office, and there was no blood. I mean, none anywhere. And it's like, okay, obviously you guys shot this on the weekend, and they said you could shoot here, just don't get blood on the walls. It's a real place. But it just looked too obvious, way too obvious. So
yeah, a lot of times I'll do things like, so that even that sequence I was just talking about, the one with the back door, the sliding glass door, the Woodsman comes in and then he acts as the girl, right? And the way we show that, he storms in, the girl screams, but then we cut away to some blood being splattered on a little shelf, the coffee mug. That was a shot I did months and months and months later in my garage. I just had a little shelf thing in there, and I put a couple objects on it, and then I just spit blood on it from off frame. So that was the blood splatter. But since it was in my garage, then I could just sort of hose it off down the driveway, and it was all good. So there's stuff like that.
And what
Where
about
if it's going to be a cutaway anyway, you could shoot it somewhere else.
that's probably one of the best things to do. Yeah, yeah, is to have that cutaway, because then you're still getting the blood, but you're getting the blood where you want it, instead of worrying about somebody's kitchen that's just being nice that to let you use it. So yeah, that's a good idea. So good film school tips here. So keep extra carpet, keep garbage bags for ceilings. Spray blood in your garage, not in somebody's home.
If you can write stuff where if you can write stuff where the stuff happens in the bathtub, then that contains the blood and the person can just stay in there and clean up, right? So that's helpful. But also a kitchen floor, like you can because usually it's better than carpet, where you can clean up the blood. So I've even shot in a room that I don't necessarily show the floor, but then for the blood shot, we moved into the kitchen and did kind of an overhead view for the actual kill. And that way we could have blood. So it was more like a living room thing by the window with a table and chairs for most of the scene. But then when it actually came to the kill, we moved to the kitchen and looked down on the kitchen floor, but you don't know we moved room. You just think, oh, I guess that they had a linoleum floor under these chairs that we've been watching for the last 10 minutes.
Right. Which a lot of places do. They have that fake floor that, that's supposed to look like wood or brick or whatever it is. So yeah, you would never know. And so what about, now you did go a little bit into post-production. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, well, like I said, it was, John really wanted to finish the previous movie he had shot first. And so it just sat around and I moved on and was doing some other stuff. And it was a bummer just because we're like, oh, people involved in the movie, of course, would be like, for a few years, are like, well, when is that coming out? I'm like, well, John's finishing this other thing, then he'll get to it. So like I said, Mike, at one point, he was like, listen, man, I have this set up. I would love to help edit this if that'll help it move along at all. So John and I both said, yeah. I was like, yeah, I haven't gotten to it. I know you guys can do a good job. So I had co-written and co-produced Blood-Sucking Redneck Vampires with Mike back in 2003. And he was the editor. I mean, it was a similar situation where I sat next to him when he was editing. So for a lot of it. So that was kind of the situation here. He was the editor, but I was there almost the whole time doing it. And actually, there was one day in particular. I don't know what the deal was. I think it was like Monday was a federal holiday, and I actually worked at a college, so we were closed. Worked at a business, so they were not. And so I went up and stayed for the weekend. But then when he went to work on Monday, I got up like at 8 when he left for work, and I edited all the way till he got home. And I actually did almost the entire house party sequence I cut together just in that one day. I got like 20 minutes cut together just by like focusing, like, okay, I'm going to edit for 8 hours straight to get this chunk of the movie done. But it took about a year. I mean, it was like a year and a month, I think, maybe, from when he said that. And then I went up about every month for a weekend and cutting stuff together till the following May. And that would have been, I don't know, my notes again, 2013. So that was 4 years after we shot it. We premiered it at this horror convention. And subsequent to that, did a lot of fine tuning, fixing sound and different things like that. And then worked a lot on the extra features and stuff. And again, it was the November of the next year, 2014, when I finally got a DVD made and out. So yeah, it was a good process. Mike's a good editor. There was a lot of footage because it's a big movie with a lot of people in it. And so it's a lot to sort of trim down. There were a few snags that I talk about this in the commentary track. Actually, there were a couple instances where Tom Stedham as a sheriff said the wrong character name during some dialogue that I didn't catch. And so we didn't notice that till we were editing, which, like I just said, is 4 years later. So, we were like, oh no, he said, blah, 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 instead of this. So it wasn't a matter of just saying, oh, let's get Tom and reshoot it. Tom was in Alabama, so in one case we were able to lift him saying that other name from an earlier part of the conversation and make it work audio. And we covered it up with he was talking to the reporter in the car. So we just cut away to her to cover that audio or that edit because it wouldn't match his mouth. So that was one thing we had to fix in post that we noticed. The other thing was there was a phone call sequence where it's the sheriff and his estranged wife, and he gets a phone call, and same thing. He used the wrong name on the phone call, and I didn't pick it up until we were editing. And there was nothing I could do. I remember just we were wrecking her, but we looked at a couple different takes. I'm like, there's nothing. There's no way. We just did it in one shot. It's like there's no cutaways. There's nothing to cut away to, because it was a two shot of the two characters on the couch. So it wasn't. So for a while there, we actually considered so Bryn played the wife, and she just lived in the Portland area. So she was a couple hours away. I thought, if we can get her and get a close up of her face, try to match the lighting, maybe we can make something work where it cuts away to her. But that was going to be, tricky to make it match. And of course you got to coordinate, with her, and she's going to have to travel, or I'm going to have to travel. What I ended up doing was the other idea was, let's just show him picking up the phone off of the table. And so I just shot, I just framed up my coffee table. I put a little doodad on it, put the phone there, and then I reach in and grab the phone and pick it up. And we were able to use that cutaway to mask the cut that we made. We were able to cut the dialogue to where he doesn't say the name. He doesn't say the right or wrong name. We took that little part out, but because of that, it was a jump cut. So me reaching in and picking the phone up off the table and then lingering on the table for just a few extra frames covered that up. So we didn't have to do the shot with Brent. But, there's a problem solving thing that you're 4 years after the original footage, the actor you need is in, the other side of the country. And we had to get creative problem solving on that. But most of the stuff, we didn't have any issues with. It was, went together pretty well. It's just a long process because there was a lot of footage to go through. And, you've seen it's a Herculean. I mean, compared to some of my other stuff where you've got, 7 people in the whole movie and 3 locations. This was a monster comparatively. So a lot of stuff to do.
You're Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, right.
Well, with saying the wrong name, I can completely relate to that because Dustin Ferguson asked me to direct Meat Hook Massacre 4. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then, but I want to make Aximus 2 first. So we were shooting Aximus 2, and I don't know why, once again, kind of like you, I didn't catch it, is Drew Marvick as the killer Santa he kills one person and says this is for David. And then he pulls the person out and kills them. Then a little bit later, he kills somebody else. He goes, this is for Eric, and pulls them out and kills them. But what I didn't realize is he said the same name twice. And I looked back at the script and I'm like, I don't know. Did I tell him to say the wrong name? And I think he said David twice, or he might've said Eric twice. And, but it's okay, I really didn't catch it until editing. And I'm just that doesn't sound right. There's something, why would he be killing 2 people for the same person? I really think this is a different name in here. And I looked back at the script and did some research but the wrong name was said. And so when we were shooting Meat Hook 4, and Drew plays the prophet, this homeless prophet guy, I just had him come inside when we were done shooting his scenes. And I'm like, just say these lines for me, because this is what happened. Yeah. And so then so in the homeless man gear, while we're shooting Meat Hook 4, he's doing lines for Aximus 2, because at that point, my editor, Matt Collins, was editing the film. So I could just send them, just drive them right over, or send it to them, through WeTransfer or something. And luckily, Drew in Aximus 2 he was far enough away. He was kind of down the hall that we could trick it, that it was a little dark. So, we could kind of trick it and it looks fine. I mean, I know it's there, but I don't think anybody else does. So yeah, that stuff
Right.
happens to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had something I can't remember which project it was, but something where I need a line done differently. And it was, it wasn't even a name, but it was a word, and it was a word that mattered. It was a word that mattered because it referenced something else, right? So needless to say, I needed this line done differently. But the nice thing was, it was actually, I could edit it to where I was looking at the other person for that line. So I had the actress who lived up a couple hours north of me recorded on her phone. I said, just say this line. I said, I don't know what to tell you. Say it with the phone close, say it with the phone a little far away, say it outside, just give me some options, because I wasn't sure about the ambient sound, because I always hate in movies when it's clear that people are talking in a room and you can hear that tone.
Oh yeah.
And the way it echoes, etc. And then, suddenly there's a line that clearly was done ADR months later in a studio right next to a microphone. It's like, these are big Hollywood movies. You would think that that people making these giant movies would fix that, right? But they don't. I still see that every once in a while. It's like, well, that was clearly dubbed. Why don't you sound like there's a room? So anyway, but she recorded like 4 or 5 different versions of the line, like in different parts of her house. And one of them sounded pretty close to what it was in the movie. So I was able to just lay that in on the cutaway and fix it. And, without having to travel to her or reshoot it, she just was able to do it on her phone. So that's nice technology wise that sometimes you can fix it that way these days.
Oh yeah. And that's a question I'll be asking you near the end, is about technology. Now to kind of go off of my notes that I took while watching the film, the logging area at the beginning of the film, real logging area?
I believe that was a Christmas tree farm. So that was a location. So Bob Olin plays the I'm forgetting the name. He's the guy that gets killed at the cabin, spoiler alert, but he's the boss on the logging thing. And it was either a family friend or a friend of his had that property. So he got us that location. So we didn't have to just shoot like in the woods in a park somewhere. It was actually on someone's property. And at the very end, when the reporter is talking to Bob in the cabin later, and he sort of flashes back to the massacre, at the end of his flashback, he hops in his truck and he heads on this road. At the end of that, you can see rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of trees,
right?
Small like pine trees, and that's the Christmas tree farm where they're growing all the trees. So that was a Christmas tree farm as a real location that Bob hooked us up with.
Nice. And it looks really good. You can see the trees back there, but I thought for a second, is that like a Christmas tree thing? But then no, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. It works. There's nothing like a real location.
There were a bunch of areas where there were just sort of piles of logs that were from some other clearing, some other. So like when the guy's having lunch, he's just sitting on this big old log that was there with a pile of other wood that they had moved from somewhere. So yeah, it was all just right there and real.
And so when he kills everybody, it then goes to, and spoilers for people who haven't seen this, but it is an older film. So, spoilers anyways. He kills all these people, and then it cuts to like some like teens or 20 somethings discussing the murder. I was thinking yes. And I was thinking, not just in this film, but many others, Friday the 13th Part 2, The Burning, all those movies. Do you think this is more of an interpretation of how they're like, of what they're saying? Like maybe the guy who's at the logging place in your film, maybe that's not exactly how it happened because it's being told by like a third party. Is that, do you get what I'm saying? And I kind of thought about that while watching yours. So is what happened at the logging place exactly what happened, or is it more of kind of an urban legend interpretation of what this guy's saying?
So this is what I find fascinating. Well, to answer your question, I think what the audience sees on that logging massacre is what happened. Again, John wrote the script. So it wasn't John Bowker wrote the script, it wasn't my story, but I believe, yes, that's what happened. And so when we go to the campfire scene, you know, the guy has just finished telling that story, and the one girl's like, well, that's baloney. And so then they start trading off like, well, I heard this, that he went crazy and did this. Well, I heard the cops shot him. I heard this, right? So even there's a little bit of that, well, you say that's happened, but this is what I heard, and this is what I heard. So I think right there, what John was trying to do was plant that seed of exactly what you're saying, where people hear things and they get misinterpreted, or it's a game of telephone type of thing, or whatever, you know, these legends, urban legends that get developed, you know, morph over time. Like I said, I think what the audience sees in the movie is what happened. But these people are talking about, well, I heard this. What I found fascinating, I watched the movie recently with the director's commentary, right? When it was John and I. And when we got to that part, I made a comment about how I like in movies, like when they have a situation where different people start saying, well, I heard it was this way. Well, I heard it was this way. And the audience either knows how it really happened, and it's sort of a smirking thing like, oh, these people are crazy, why would they think that? Or the audience really doesn't know, and it's like, oh, well, all those things sound particularly, you know, gruesome. That'd be terrible. And shortly after, I'm not going to get the year, I think it was 2013. I mean, it was several years after I shot this Blood Creek Woodsman, but I made Drifter, which, hey, I hear the Drifter showing up. I didn't even plan that, but
there it is, right there.
I made Drifter, and the whole one of the things in that was the fact that it took place in this house that was for sale, but there were all these town legends about the house. It was called the Blood House, and many different characters throughout the movie talk about why it's called the Blood House, and every story is different. And it's just funny to me that years earlier, doing the commentary for this Blood Creek Woodsman, I made a comment about how I like that aspect. And years later, I did a movie where that was a big aspect of the movie.
Yeah, I just, you know, like, you know, in this film, you know, what if the guy who was telling it goes, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. Bob, why don't you tell it? Or Susie, why don't you tell the story? It might have been a completely different version than what he would have said. So the audience would have seen something totally different. Yeah. So, and I didn't really think about that until pretty much, last night when I was watching the film. And so I thought I'd get your opinion on that. One thing that I did notice in here is that we do have a Mr. Sherlock. And my question to you is, should directors or even writers and stuff, is it okay to use your names in movies? Can I name a character John Ward or Mr. Ward, and that's okay?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, again, John, my friend John wrote this, so he named the sheriff Sherlock partially because of me, but partially because so that he could have the line "No shit, Sherlock" in the
that's
bar
what I figured.
fights.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so it was, and he said that before, that it was kind of those two things is what why he named it that. In retrospect, let's see, I feel like if that happened today, right, I would tell John, I don't want you to name a character Sherlock in there. And here's why, because people think that I did it, even though if you look at the credits, I didn't write it. But even if I did write it, I mean, I wouldn't do that, I guess, because I think it's distracting, right? I think it's distracting because if you know, and not, you know, people who watch movies don't always know who the director is, but if you do, and then there's a character in there named that, it starts you wondering like, oh, I wonder if they named that after themselves. And that instantly takes you out of the movie, you know? So I'm always trying to be conscious of things that might take you out of the movie, whether it's, you know, a phrase like the too obvious or something in the, you know, like a physical thing in the background, you know, where it's like, that thing would make sense in this room, but you know what? It's so jarring, or the color is so bright on it, or it's so specific that if I cut to a person talking and there's this cool looking sculpture behind them that has nothing to do with the movie, I don't want the audience to go, wow, look at that thing in the corner. What is that? That's really cool. As their mind is thinking that, they've totally been taken out of the narrative. So
Sure.
that's the thing I feel about that name. And like I said, John said he put it in there partially for me, but partially so he could have that line as an instigator for the fight.
Okay.
So I mean, I
That
know
makes
that there's
sense.
a rule that's saying you can't do it, but I probably wouldn't because I'd be afraid to be distracting.
Right, right. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Definitely no rule. I've just seen, many indie filmmakers definitely do the detective corpsman or,
Yeah. Cronenberg.
inspector, yeah, Cronenberg, Mr. Carpenter, and we all know what they're doing, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
every once in a while, yeah,
Yeah.
you get the detective ward, and I always wondered if like people are like, it's a little too on the nose, dude. You put your own name in there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I think it works, and it doesn't bother me. But it
Yeah.
just since it was in there, I thought I would ask and once again get your opinion on something. Now your
Yeah. Yeah.
films have a fair amount of nudity in them. You like nudity? I'm going to take it.
Sure. I mean, I think it's one of
Long
the elements. I've
pause.
said this for a long time. It's just one of the B movie elements. Yeah, it's one of the B movie elements. So blood, peace, and boobs, or whatever you want to phrase it. So yeah, and I think in this movie in particular, the slasher genre, the B movie slasher genre, I think nudity is a part of that. It's always one of the ingredients. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to it. I think I think it's there's people that watch a lot of these movies that expect a certain amount of stuff. They expect a certain amount of nudity or bloodshed or making out or I don't know what else, slime, monsters. If you're watching a creature feature, I want to see some creature action. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's like I said, I just sort of look at it as part of the mix, I guess.
Well, yeah, because I've watched movies where I've just said to myself in kind of a Darth Vader-ish type of voice, kind of I find your film disturbing with its lack of nudity, and
Yeah.
so it's refreshing to see your stuff, and these women do not seem to want to keep the camera away from their body. So because they are you tend to like more luscious, kind of larger women, which is nice to see instead of the Barbie doll stick thin actresses that we get that look like they can only eat a grape or they'll blow up. I mean, these look like a lot of your actresses that are in your
Yeah.
films look like they'd be fun to hang out with and go party and like have a drink with, and so that's refreshing.
Yeah. I think I'm very lucky, and I've said this before too. I'm very lucky to have friends and have met people who are very comfortable with their bodies, are very comfortable with that. And I have only I've only had to do real casting like once, and that was back in 2000. I had actually done a bunch of movies and no nudity. I'd never shot nudity. The Evil Maker was the first movie I worked on where there was nudity. But for Underbelly, I was trying to do, I mean, I say erotic thriller, which really is what my initial thing was, but the lead character is a nerd and he remains a nerd through the whole movie. So erotic is questionable, but it's still a thriller. And I was trying to do something. I had done a lot of comedy stuff, a lot of stuff with monsters and Halloween masks and sort of goofball stuff. And I was trying to make something a little more serious and with no aliens or monsters in it, just sort of a straight thriller. So, but the story is this nerd gets hired by a professor to drive a car downstate to his niece. But when he gets to this small town, he can't find the niece, and all he runs into are like these various prostitutes and thugs that are like, "Oh, you need to get out of town." And he doesn't understand what's happening, but it turns out the niece had gotten involved in the underbelly of the local crime dude. And so, but because there's a bunch of prostitutes as a part of this story that the guy is running this ring down there, there was some nudity in there. So I actually needed to do some casting to find someone that would do that, because up to that point, I had just worked with my friends, and they weren't, they weren't game to do that. So, but after that, a few people I worked with were comfortable with it, and then again, it was sort of this natural process. Friends of friends, I'd have a screening, and they'd bring their friend. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do that," and so it just ended up building up a stable, I guess, if you will, of people that I, what are they, like the usual gang of suspects that I usually pull into my movies, and several of them are, comfortable with that. So sometimes I'll write that in specifically knowing I'm going to ask so and so to do that part. I know this is what they're comfortable with. Other times I may just write something, but I know there's 3 or 4 people who potentially could do that, or would, are okay with this type of scene. And then it depends on schedules to see who's in it. So yeah, and as far as the body type, I mean, I think I tend towards the larger woman, but it's not, I got plenty of other, females in the movie that are what you would call, average size or whatever. But I
Sure.
think part of that is just the people I know, and it's more, I was going to say normal, not normal, but regular. I mean, I hear this from people who buy the movies. They're like, they use refreshing, just like you just used. That's the word they use. They're like, it's refreshing to see women who look natural, like you're saying, it's not a stereotype from Hollywood of someone very, very thin. It's potentially, more like their wives or girlfriends. And so, like I said, I don't make huge effort to do that. It just happens to be who I know or who I've come in contact with through these various, conventions or screenings, who are game for that type of stuff.
Well, it's influenced me, and I would say that your films have helped with that, and with seeing, even if it's a large guy or a large woman, whatever it is, that I'm a big guy, and I did a post a while back, I think it was sometime last year, where I've said, sometimes you just have to get outside your comfort zone. And I posted all the pictures of me, like just in boxer briefs and my guts hanging out, or I'm over some sort of, I don't know, it's like a device that a guy would hang over, and then they get whipped in the butt, and I'm naked and my pants are pulled down, and I mean
Yeah.
it's you see other people that you can relate to that don't seem to have a problem with, I have really big boobs or small boobs, or I'm a large person or a small person, that they just don't care. They'll do it because they're very confident, and and they're proud of their body, or whatever it might be. And so, and like I said, it was like, your films and some others have influenced me to actually take more pride in myself, to where before, if somebody would have said, "Hey John, would you take your shirt off for the scene, it requires your being in a bed," I'd be like, "No, nobody's seeing me with my shirt off." And now it's like, yeah, sure, why not? If these other people can do it, why can't I?
Yeah. Well, life is short, and plus, I think for me, I think what ends up happening is the the I often think of it as a spider web, because like I used to own a back in the 90s, and we had, a lot of customers there, and then even after the shop closed down, I had become friends with several of those customers, and I was making the movie, not too long after that I was making the movies. And so, I'd reach out to those friends now to either be in them or to come to a screening. And so it ended up, like, for instance, through this one friend, he had a girlfriend who brought to a screening, and he came up afterwards to introduce her, and she said, "I'd love to be up on that big screen naked in your next movie." And I was like, wow, nice
Whoa,
to meet you.
okay.
And uh, and so she was in several movies, but then she had a friend who was like, "Oh, I'd love to do this stuff too." And they had another friend who was a fire dancer and a free spirit. And so I think part of it, I've been lucky in the types of movies I make potentially attract a certain audience, like, indie B movie, schlocky, whatever you want to call it. People that think, "Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah, they're showing this crazy horror movie at the theater pub. I'll go to that." Right. I think there's a personality type that maybe digs that, and then once they see it, they're like, "Oh, I'm part of that." And yeah, I go to this hippie festival every year and run around topless, or I do fire dancing and I do this, and I that's nothing to me, right? And
Right. Yeah.
beyond, you do an extension of that, also saying, "Look, I want you to, get covered in pudding and writhe around on the floor and pretend you're being possessed by some alien intelligence." They're like, "That sounds great. What a blast. I'd love to spend my Saturday doing that." It's like it's that personality type. And so I think as it relates to being comfortable with your body and being comfortable, letting other people see the body, I think that's wrapped up with this other stuff about, yeah, sure, you want me to, put this or wear this outfit or, pretend I'm getting killed and scream. That sounds fun. That it's all wrapped up in a particular personality type that for better or for worse, I've been able to build a little stable of those people.
Yeah, and that's great. I think that's absolutely wonderful that you could have those types of people there, because it's and I think that it primarily is women too, that we tend to think that women are all kind of closed up and repressed, and if you say something. But when I posted the pictures of myself, I think I got more likes, hearts, and stuff from women than I did from men, because I think that finally they're seeing, oh, here's a guy who's doing it.
Yeah.
It's just not a woman again who's being, who's doing these type of things, and they like that.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
it just seems to kind of work out that way. So
Yeah. I think that's cool.
Yeah, so do I. So good for you. Good for you, and good for them. There now, Sheriff Sherlock, he has a shirt on that says Team Stedman, and I saw that the actor's name is Stedman. So what's that shirt mean?
In my mind, that's similar to his name, right? It's Stedham, actually. It's
Stedham. Okay.
Stedhm, I think.
Oh, H.
So
okay.
Tom,
I made it look, my handwriting's horrible.
So I'm not sure if he was doing it at the time we shot this movie, but he either was still doing it or shortly before that. He was an amateur wrestler. Well, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say amateur. He was a wrestler, and he would go on a circuit down in the South to these various events. And at one point he got on, like, he was a promoter, and he bought a ring, and so he would go around and he would put together shows down in the southern United States. So Team Stedham, he had shirts done up. That was the name of his team for putting on these wrestling shows. And Tom was a big self-promoter, which is good to do when you're a wrestling promoter, and when you're an actor too. You gotta, if you want to make it, you got to be willing to try to promote yourself and get your name out there. So that was his, he wanted to wear that shirt, and did that today. I probably would not have him do that because I think it's distracting. But at the time, we were like, okay, sure, man. So that's how it came about. That's his wrestling team shirt.
Okay.
And he wanted to wear it in those scenes, and we were like, okay, sure.
And the bartender that owns the bar, is he the actual owner of the bar?
He was, yeah. Richard Johnson, yeah, he had that at the time, and so the bar and the restaurant and the house, that's the sheriff's house, and actually the sequence towards the end where there's a big storage garage with an RV in it, that was actually at the back of that same property. That was just a storage building. So all that stuff he had at the time. We had free run of it.
Oh, very nice. Do you do that a lot?
It's great.
Do like if you say, hey, can I shoot in your bar, would you like to be an actor in it, or do they have to have some sort of like acting skill or anything like that?
Well, that's a good question. This happened in a backwards way, because I already knew him because we went to high school together, so that was pre-existing. But I think, I don't, there's a rule necessarily. I think if I'm asking to shoot somewhere, I may see if they want to be a background player, like if it's a restaurant or something, they could sit in the background. But yeah, I think, maybe if it's a small part, like if it's, I mean, that bartender part was not minuscule, but let's say it's a situation where it's a waitress or maybe a bartender where they just only have, like, they take an order and they have like one line. I might be up for that. I probably would, at this point, I probably would not, ask them to play a major role having no clue at all if they could act. On the other hand,
So
I might ask and then ask to try it out with them and see, but 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 to be honest, I just haven't gotten into that situation too much.
okay.
But the risk was there that you get someone who can't act at all, and you don't want to be act in a corner like, oh no, what am I going to do now?
Right. Yeah. Because there are producers out there and stuff who will, well, Ed Wood being one of them, where, if we could use your house or your, whatever it is, or money,
Right.
you can act in my film. And, they make fun of
Yeah.
that in the film Ed Wood, where,
Right.
one of the actors, I think I think he's a cop in it. He's just like, hey, you come over here
Yeah.
now. And they
Yeah.
point out how bad of an actor this guy is, but they just got a
Right.
bunch of money from him. So what are you going to
Yeah. Yeah.
do?
Yeah. I haven't been in that. I guess I haven't been in that situation where someone, because most of the time I'm just self-financing. Sometimes I do these like pre-order campaigns or like, but usually that's after the movie's at least halfway done or maybe done, where I do kind of a DVD pre-order. And I have extra levels where you can give some more money to get a producer's credit or something. But most of the time initially, I'm usually just producing myself. So I'm not beholden necessarily to, an investor like that situation where they're like, well, I gave you, $500. What are you going to, I want to play this guy.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. What are your thoughts on crowdfunding?
Well, here's the thing. So when I did Underbelly, again, this is 2000. So I think I did this in maybe 2001 or two, um, way before any of the platforms. I crowdfunded that. Basically, I was selling for $100 a pop. I called them the producer package. And for $100, you came in the credits as a producer, you copy of the finished movie. You would get a certificate that I would make up, and then I was giving you sneak peeks, because what I would do is I would post photos from the shoot on my website, but on a page that wasn't linked anywhere. And then I would email, again, this is back in the Stone Age, right? So I would email you the link to, hey, here's the photos from the shoot we did this weekend. And that's what I was offering. And I'll be honest, I got 7 people to sign up for that, but that was fantastic because that was $700 more than I would have had otherwise.
Right.
And then what ended up happening, I threw in some money. I mean, I already was throwing in money, but I like put a couple extra fake names in there. But then a couple of the actors actually were like, hey, how about instead of paying me this, just I'll give you this much more money and I can be a producer. And I was like, if you want to, sure. So that was kind of a crowdfunding thing, in that I set up this. I had my Dr. Squid website at the time, so I set this all up on a page, and I had an email list at the time, which I still have actually. And I emailed that out, but also I had a mailing list. Back when I had the comic book store in the 90s, I started doing a zine called Dr. Squid, and it was B movie reviews and all kind of articles about weird stuff. And so from that, I built a mailing list of people who liked the zine. And then when I started doing movies, I was selling movies out of the back of Draculina magazine and things like that. And so I built up more of a mailing list from those orders. So when I did the Underbelly thing, I also had a mailing list, so snail mailing list. So I mailed out a couple different promotional things saying, "Hey, I'm doing this thing, and you can get in on it. Here's the details." So essentially, I was crowdfunding. I didn't have an Indiegogo platform, but I had a page that had all the different levels on it, and I promoted up to the way that I could at the time, which was actually it was snail mail and email. I think I had MySpace at the time, probably. So I probably posted it on MySpace.
What's that?
But it was before
What's
Facebook.
MySpace?
I know, right? So anyway, so that was like early on. And then years later, like 2004, maybe, I did the same thing, basically like the same exact model for my movie Twisted Fates. And I can't remember, how many I got for that, but probably a similar amount. And yeah, that went pretty well. So I've done that a few different times. I did that for Beyond the Wall of Fear. And so actually for several things recently, I've done, it's still kind of a package, but I wait till the movie's either done or almost all the way done. I'm just sort of the end of post-production. And I'll do that pre-order thing. So it's basically everything, you're pre-ordering a copy of the DVD, but it's just if you want to add on these other items, a producer credit or executive producer credit, or a piece of original artwork, or, 3 other movies from my store, or some oddball, super weirdo thing from the movie. I'll just have all these different levels that people can get. And that, that's a way for people to order the movie, but also get in the credits if they want, or, get some other stuff and show their support for all the movies. So I'll be doing that. And the reason I try to do it towards the end of the process is so that they don't have to wait too long for the movie, because of course, we won't even talk about 2020 screwing things up, but even before that, it might take me a year to get a movie done, because I'm shooting, I've got to coordinate with everybody's schedules, and I'm just a one-man band. So, I usually am writing and directing and shooting it, and then doing all the editing, and sometimes doing the music. So, I like all that stuff, but it just takes time. So I hate the idea of like trying to raise money to make a movie, and then it's a year or two before someone would get it. I would sort of feel bad making them wait that long. So instead, I kind of fund the movie myself, but then at the tail end of it, then I do the crowdfunding, and that way they get their movie, in 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is. So I haven't done crowdfunding on the platforms. Even these things that I'm talking about, I've done it just on my own website, and I use my own social media, et cetera, to sort of promote that. But it works okay. And the part of the reason I don't use the platforms is because, they take a piece of the action, right? And I realize the trade-off for that is, but you're reaching a gigantic, I could reach a lot more people if I put something up on Kickstarter than if I just have it on my site and I'm responsible for promoting it. But see, I feel like, you know what, I'm going to attract people who are already following me, or already friends of mine, or people who've purchased my movies in the past. That's a prime audience for buying my next movie. Where even if it's, if I throw something on Kickstarter, the chunk that Kickstarter will take and the chunk that Visa takes and whatever else, I don't know that I'd reach, even if I reach a broader audience, is that going to bring a lot more in? Plus, the big reason, to be perfectly honest, is if I did something on one of those platforms, I know from reading enough and listening to podcasts that the way to be successful with those is to bug the shit out of people. Right? And I don't want to do that. I feel bad. I've had enough promoting it when I'm in one of those modes where I'm like, okay, I got every few days or every week, I got to promote this. I know for a fact you got to promote every freaking day, and you got to really push hard to make those goals. And I don't want to be involved in that. So it's just a personal thing for me. No, what I'm doing kind of works for me now, so I'm okay where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's very understandable, because I've had 2 successful campaigns and one that I call an utter failure. And but it's a kind of a 24/7 job.
Yeah,
just
right?
Alone.
It's a whole other thing.
Totally. Unless you have a team, and if you're doing it solo, right. It just takes a week or so just to put everything together, because I've done Indiegogo, and when you're putting up pictures and descriptions, and you got to create everything from just this blank canvas. It's all it's every day. And it's very time consuming and very frustrating with how long it takes. So yeah, it's understandable. Yeah. So I get that. Yeah. It's.
I will say, related to that. So when I got involved in Monos Returns, so I was one of the producers. So there were 4 producers on that movie, and we did a Kickstarter campaign for it. And so Rachel, one of the other producers, had done a Kickstarter campaign for a movie she had done. She might have she did that. She may have done another couple other campaigns, but she was the key person on the campaign. And So she, but we were the team. So like I did all the graphics. I mean, she developed this list of here's all the graphics we need, and a bunch of them modified week by week depending on where we were. So I was the guy doing all that, but she was the one writing all the posts and doing all the posts, and she had this whole plan done out. And you're right, that's like a full-time job to get that together and run. It was enough work for me just keeping up with her, prompting us like, okay guys, today you need to share this link everywhere you can, and Joe, I need this graphic updated to reflect this. Even just that little part was a lot of stuff going on. So I can't imagine trying to run it yourself and do it well. And the last thing I want to do is get on one of those platforms and kind of not go for it, and then either have it fail or have it not do very well. And then it's like, okay, well, I did it, but I probably could have done the same amount of work with my own website through my own networks and gotten that amount of money without giving them a piece of it and without kind of being annoying to people. But I don't, that's just me personally, totally. I don't lament people that do that. There's people that do that well. And, more power to them. I think if you do that and people are willing to give you money to make stuff, then that's great. Just do it.
Right. Yeah.
I know it's a lot of work.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. So, so to get back to this here, so where was the film like mostly shot? Was that in the Oregon area?
Yeah. So the restaurant and the sheriff's house and the RV storage was all in a little town called Markham. So the Markham Inn is the name of the restaurant, and so Markham is the town, which is kind of near Salem. Salem is the state capital, so it's I don't know, like an hour east. No, not an hour. It's east of Salem, east of the capital. But anyway, so that's a big part of it. The cabin at the lake was a different part of Oregon, and then we shot in different people's houses. But yeah, I think it was all in Oregon. We shot up a few interiors in Portland. But yeah, a lot of it was in the town of Markham. And so all local stuff, local to me. Yeah.
Nice. Always good to keep stuff local. That's what I like. So it's better not to have it all spread all over the place. If you just kind of keep it in one area, perfect.
Yeah.
Now there's an effect I'd like to talk to you about. Legs on fire. This to me looked pretty real. So I actually rewound the DVD back, and I see that the leg is it's moving like this. It's not just like this, like it's a 2x4. How did you do that? I mean, that looked really good.
Well, so on the DVD, there's a behind the scenes thing that shows that, but I'll tell you how. So I built a pair of fake legs. So the house where we shot that had an existing fire pit there. And so what we did was I built legs out of wooden dowels. So I basically took 2 long, like inch thick wooden dowels. I cut them in half, and I used small hinges for the knees, right? So that way they would flex at the knee. And then I took a pair of old sneakers and I nailed them to the bottom of the dowel. Right, so the shoes were attached with a nail at the bottom of the dowel, and then I wrapped the legs. So the wooden part of the leg, I wrapped them with old T-shirts that were going to go to Goodwill anyway. I just wrapped the T-shirts around it and then used string to kind of tie those all on there just to give them a little bulk. So and then what I did was those 2 legs at the top of the legs, I nailed them to another board that would kind of act as the pelvis. So you've got this board with the 2 legs hanging down. There's a hinge at the knees, and then the feet are just nailed on, so they're going to stay like this. And then I set the camera up, and my friend Rob, actually, he was the one that was puppeteering it because I wanted to look through the camera. And so, we had the fire going, and he just flops the legs on there, and I kind of directed him, I'm like, okay, move around. Now move to the side, pull back a little bit, and then I was watching the camera to make sure it was the framing was good. But yeah, he was just flopping them around. But you're right, because the knees would move. It did look pretty cool. And we got when I shot, that was an insert shot we did a little while later. But when we shot the guy getting pushed, I also just recorded him screaming at the time, so I could lay that in over the shot of the legs. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that effect too. And,
Yeah,
and it does sort of
looks
freak people out.
great.
I think probably like you said, because it doesn't necessarily look fake. I think maybe it's because the
Mm-mm.
legs are flexing.
I think that has a lot to do with it. You always see in movies somebody throw a dummy off a cliff and it's just flailing. It's like its legs are going like it has no bones, and you're like, oh well, that's a dummy.
Yeah.
And then they tried doing it some other ways where it almost looks like a scarecrow, where it's so stiff that's like, why isn't anything moving?
Oh, yeah.
And I always thought, like, why couldn't they make just
Right.
like the elbows move or the knees move? And so
Right,
yeah, it looks
right.
great. So when people who haven't seen the
Yeah.
film see this, definitely look for that scene because it's very effective.
And sometimes, I guess that to me that seems simple. I mean, some people might say, yeah, but you had to build all that stuff. It's like, yeah, but at least I could do it. I don't feel like I have that much effect skills, but sometimes, it's, you sort of think through it, like, well, what's the minimum? A lot of times I think about this, what's the minimum I need to sell this, and that includes all kinds of stuff. It's like, do I need to show this axe going into someone, or can I just cut away and splatter the wall? I just spit some blood at a wall. And sometimes the answer is no, I need to show the axe because I've cheated too many times in movie X where there's too many cutaways to blood splatters, and I hate that. I hate that. It's okay to do that sometimes, right? And we do that in Blood Creek Woodsman a little bit, but if every kill is a cutaway, I feel cheated, right? So I try to strike a balance. So sometimes, yeah, you got to show that axe coming in. But then the question is, well, what do you need to show? Is it just the axe? Is it a shirt over a piece of styrofoam and the axe goes in? Is that all you need? Or do you need some blood behind that so that when the axe hits, there's some blood that comes out? It's like, what's the minimum I need that'll still look good, but make that effect work? Do I need to build an entire prop for this thing? Or can I just show, this insert of their arm, and that could be a little piece of fake arm, So that might be, where that came from. Is like, well, I could show I don't have to build an entire body burning up in the fire. We'll just show his legs moving around, and then I could build that.
Right. Yeah. And that's, like you said, there's, it's not listed here on, because that's what I was looking for on the back here, but there is if I'm remembering correctly, audio commentary, making of, trailers. Am I missing anything? That's 3 things.
And there's a blooper reel too.
Bloopers, that's right. So I think there's 4 things total on this that are worth watching.
Yeah, a lot of stuff on that one.
Yeah. And because I know what you mean with the, with what you show is at first my effects artist, Miranda Dudley, was kind of against this. But in the first Axemas film is we needed like a hand to go through something, like somebody's stomach or their chest. So I had her go out and buy 2 mannequins, one female, one male. And she cut a hole in it. Yeah. And we've been using those since. The reason why I say that she was kind of against a little bit was she's like, well, wait a minute. If we use those mannequins like 20 times, that doesn't really show my effect work. And I said, no. If we use them differently every time, it shows your effect work. So if we could cram a Christmas tree through one of them, and then if we could stick a meat hook 4 where Bubba's hand goes through the guy's chest and pulls his heart out, that's another effect. It's just a way to do it, but you have to make it look real. You have to figure out how to get that Christmas tree through somebody. And those things have paid for themselves so many times now and have been in everything I make, and including some other people's films where I've let them borrow them. That so it's just shown from from like here maybe down to like where their waist is. So that's where I show stuff, kind of going like off of what you were saying. It's just show this area and then cut to their face going with blood coming out. So it's it's very important to kind of figure out what to do.
That Christmas tree gag is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll let her know.
That I totally know what you mean. You can take that same thing, and it's how you how you make that work. Yeah, totally agree.
Well, and that's one of these cases of because I work at a storage facility, is after Christmas and stuff, people throw away Christmas things. So somebody was throwing away 2 Christmas trees, like just fake Christmas trees.
Yeah.
And I grabbed him knowing that we'd be
Wow.
making Aximus, you know, 2
Yeah.
at some point. And I got to be
Yeah.
honest, because I've said this before, but the that's in tribute to Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, where Ricky takes the umbrella and shoves it through the guy, and it opens up behind him when they're in the alleyway. And I told Miranda, I said, I want to do something like that. I want something like that, but I want it with a Christmas tree. And I said, we got to do it bigger than Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. And it took her a little bit, but she got it. And it looks great because she just used 2 Christmas trees and just had one in the front and one in the back. And then we used the mannequin to push it through. So it was, you know, there's plenty of ways you could do stuff. You just have to figure out, like you said, you know, how are you going to do it? You know, what you want to show and all that stuff. So,
yeah.
And I don't want to keep you for too much longer. So I'll mention, I really like the soundtrack. So I thought that was really good. Did you do that?
I did not. We actually, so Steve Sessions is a filmmaker, has made a bunch of stuff, Cremains and Hellbound, Book of the Dead.
Oh, I know those. Okay.
Contagion. Yeah. Sent to the Shriek of the Sasquatch. I really think his stuff is great. I met Steve online back in the, I guess, early 2000s, maybe late 90s. And yeah, so he, you know, he made all kinds of low budget stuff. So, but he also is a composer and made really cool music. So when he did the music for John's movie, Evil Maker 2, Abomination. And then when he heard we were doing this Blood Creek Woodsman, he actually reached out to us and said, I have to do music for a movie called Blood Creek Woodsman. And we were like, that's great, right? Because we love the stuff he does. He does the music for his own movies, and then he had already done Abomination. So we knew he could do great stuff. And so what we did was we ended up sending him a cut of the movie, and he ended up doing the entire score. Like, he sent us 2 MP3 files, like, here's the whole score for the movie. And it was great because he did it, he called it his, he actually had, I was talking about this in the commentary a little bit. He had sent us some samples, and one of them was called Orchestral Approach, and it was kind of violins and horns and sort of horn stabs and things like that. He called it a very Jerry Goldsmith approach, and we liked that. So we said, yeah, that's kind of the vibe we want, because he's also done things that are very, very John Carpenter-ish and things like that. So anyways, yeah, he gave us the score for Blood Creek Woodsman. We loved it. We laid it all in, and then we realized there are a few parts where there was a bit of a lull. We're like, oh, we really need some music here. And so I said, hey, you know, there's this part, I think we need something. Can you make something for that? There were a few instances where we were able to take a piece from an earlier part of the score and just repeat it. But I will never forget one time. So this was the instance where we said, hey, there's this part, we need a song for that because it needs something. And he sent me the file either the next day or the day after that. And he called the file Did Last Night, because he's like, oh, I just did this last night. And it was fantastic. It was like really great and fit in perfectly. So yeah, Steve Sessions did the score. He has done scores for subsequent movies. He did the score for my movie Drifter. And I did a movie called Dark Zone 13. I used a lot of his music in that. And so, yeah, great guy. And he did the music. Which,
yeah,
I think in addition to all these cool locations and so many kills that sort of forced us to do these elaborate effects and the music, I think all of that sort of pushes it up a notch. And we're really happy with it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I totally agree, because that soundtrack and the locations and stuff definitely stand out. So you can't get past that. Now, do you mind the very ending? Can I say what the very ending is, or would you prefer for me not to? Because that's kind of like a big surprise.
I think you could feel free to talk about it. I mean, you're just letting people know you're going to talk about it. We've already spoiled a few things, I suppose. So
that's true. Well, this
so
to me was.
So let's talk about it. But people realize if you haven't seen the movie, this is the end.
Yeah, this is. I have to admit, I love the film because, you know, I thought it was great. This sold me. That ending sold me 100%. And I think I even messaged you saying, please make this the sequel.
Right?
Is Scarecrows. out of nowhere.
Yeah.
They kill the bad guy, but we already got, they already talked about magic and all this stuff. So, this has kind of been brought up where this isn't just a guy. It's like almost kind of like a zombie guy. So there's almost like a white zombie type thing going on. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 3 scarecrows show up and the film ends basically on like this cliffhanger.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What was the idea with out of no? And I love scarecrows, so I'm still got my fingers crossed for that sequel. Please tell me about that.
Well, I love it too, and it goes to John. That was in the original script. That was in the script from John. The idea is the reporter has used some spell to bring the Woodsman back to life because she needs a story. I mean, that's the thing. She says several times in the movie, it's like, I'll do anything for a story, right? And so the idea is that she knew about the Woodsman from the previous year when he did the massacre, and so she uses some, we don't explain how she found a magical spell, but somehow she's used a spell to raise the Woodsman from the dead and go on a killing spree. And as you find out at the end of the movie, she's controlling him this whole time. So John's concept was that the spell that she used was really powerful, more powerful than she even realized. So in addition to raising the Woodsman, she raised other things, right? Like scarecrows. And actually at the very, very end, after all the credits, do you know what I'm talking about? I don't know if you watched all the way to the end of the credits. There's a shot of the gnome on a frog, and the eye on the frog starts to glow, right? Which is another implication that, like, oh, maybe the spell not only animated some scarecrows that were in the area, but it animated the little statue. So that's sort of a winking goofball thing. But that's the theory, is that that's what happened. And John has said before that when he put the scarecrow thing in here, he didn't necessarily think he'd make more movies, but he was open to the possibility. And the concept was he would call it the Blood Creek Chronicles. And there could be multiple movies about people dealing with these things that were all caused by this one event. So there might be Blood Creek scarecrows. There might be some other thing that is the same idea, like the blood happened in this area, thus the Blood Creek name, but something about that. So here's the problem with making that is so much time has passed, right? And I've had this discussion with people in recent years. We shot the movie in 2009. It didn't come out till 2014. And that's many years ago now, right? That's 7 years ago now. So the people who did survive the first movie, they're all going to look that much older now. So we certainly couldn't do a movie that takes place immediately after the events of the first one, because everybody will look like 10 years older. But also part of the problem is a lot of the people have moved, a lot of the players, they're living in different parts of the country. And so it would be kind of tricky to say, oh, well, let's pull this together. Now we're going to get involved in like plane flights and hotels. And oh my gosh, this is way out of what we can handle. So I'm not saying there never will be a Blood Creek Scarecrow movie, because there might be. But the idea of like, let's pick it up right here and you can watch them back to back and it's one big story, that can't really happen just because of the passage of time. So I don't know. Who knows what'll happen? We might do something. I mean, every once in a while, John talks about it. I too love scarecrows and the scarecrow movies. So it would be a blast to do that. So yeah, that's what I can say right now.
I mean, I guess if everybody,
which is not to imply, I don't want to be mysterious about it. There's no plans right now, but there may be plans later. Who knows? That's what I mean.
Right. And you could, I mean, if people have moved away and they've gotten older, I mean, it could, and not to tell you guys how to write a script, but I mean, it could just be a completely different people in that town. And it could be, just, you just leave them, he aims the gun at the camera and that's it. That's their story. And then it goes to somebody else in that town, or maybe just get one character from that ending scene to come back, for like a couple days or something like that. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, I would love it.
Yeah,
so I'm hoping
ways to do it. Okay. Never say never.
That's right. So now a couple more questions and then I'll let you go. Now we had talked about like the video editing and production software and stuff. You'd brought that up. Since you've been doing this for so long, what changes have you seen? How has this helped you? What do you, talk to me about that? That since, it's obviously today is very different than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah. 26 years ago. So when I started, I mean, actually, back when I was in high school, I would shoot stuff on a big old VHS camcorder, and I had 2 VCRs connected together, and that's how I'd edit. So I made music videos and short films and stuff like that way, just as a kid. Which, you hear interviews with people like, from Hollywood that talk about, when I was a kid, I made movies on Super 8, right? When I was a little kid, I made some movies with my dad's Super 8 camera, but then, video came in pretty quickly. So I always look at that as akin to like a lot of the horror directors saying, I made shorts on 8mm when I was a kid. I made shorts on VHS when I was in high school and college. So, but yeah, even Dimension of Blood and Monster in the Garage. I mean, I was shooting that stuff on VHS. I edited on what they call a 3/4 inch tape system that was actually used to be, it used to be like at a TV station. And then we were using it to cut together the first bunch of movies that I did. Actually, Dreamwalkers that SOV Horror put out, that was John's first movie, we cut together on 3/4 inch. Actually, Evil Maker, the first Evil Maker, we cut together on 3/4 inch. By that point, I was shooting on a format called High 8, which was small cassette. So instead of going to VHS, it's a small cassette. But it wasn't mini DV, which is an even smaller cassette. So I've gone through all of that. So I started on VHS. I shot High 8 and 8mm tape, what they call 8mm, and then mini DV for many years, all the way up through. And I always feel like I'm behind the times. I'm one of those guys that like uses what I have. I've always said, do the best you can with what you have. And what I always have is, a generation behind what all the hot people are using, right? So, like I'm not shooting in 4K on a Blackmagic right now. Maybe I will be in 10 years, but right now, I'm jumping ahead. So VHS, High 8, 8mm, cutting together tape-to-tape systems. And then eventually shooting on mini DV, and I started doing editing in iMovie on the Mac. And I would do, for a stretch there, I would do my movies in iMovie, but you couldn't do a whole movie. Like the memory couldn't process it all. So I cut it together. Like there's a movie I did called Deadly Premonitions. And I cut that together in about 10 to 15 minute segments, kind of like chapters almost. And then I exported those segments back out to the mini DV tape. And my friend Mike Haig, who we talked about earlier, who edited this movie, he would then take those segments, those 7 or 8 segments that I made, and then he'd put it into Final Cut Pro and string it together and then produce a DVD. Eventually, I bought my own setup with Final Cut Pro. And so even things like Drifter and Odd Noggins, I was shooting on mini DV tape. Many people had moved on to shooting on DLSRs, like to little SD cards, but I was still using tape with this camera I had because that's what I had.
Right.
Eventually, when I did Monos Returns, actually, got a new camera, a DLSR to shoot onto SD cards, and that's what I'm still using today. Just that I'm comfortable with it. I know how to use it. I know how to, try to make things look good. So and my computer can handle it. So I'm fine with using that for now. So that's where I'm at. And Final Cut Pro is what I've been using for quite a while now. And I was one of those people that I came into using that at the Final Cut Pro X level, Final Cut Pro 10. And I know that was a big splitting point for a lot of people because I had been using iMovie, which is the free Mac editing software, for a long time. And then when I finally decided to make that jump and go to Final Cut Pro, they had just come out with version 10, which was a big change from all the versions prior to that. And there was a lot of dissent in the community about, oh, you guys just dumbed this down to make it more like iMovie. Well, to me, that was perfect because I knew how to use iMovie and all kinds of different tricks and stuff. And so for me, the learning curve for Final Cut Pro was not as steep as it would have been if I had like upgraded a version earlier. But I do know there's plenty of people out there that are still hold a grudge because they're like, oh, Final Cut, 7 was the best thing ever. And then they screwed it all up. But for me, it worked out okay for me because I was sort of familiar with the interface. The way they had arranged everything was actually mimicking the program I was using previously. So
Okay.
that's what I've been using. So yeah, it is amazing. And I did a movie a few years ago called Dark Zone 13, and a fan of mine in Croatia actually shot one of the stories for me. So I wrote, I'd been corresponding with him for quite a bit, and I wrote this story knowing what he had to work with. He had a couple friends that would be in it, and he shot it at his house and around his neighborhood. But I wrote it knowing what he had access to. And so he shot all that in Croatia, the other side of the planet. And then, just file transferred it to me to cut together. It just blew my mind. I mean, that was 3 years ago, I guess. And even then, it just blew my mind like, wow, this is awesome. I know, more professional people have been doing that. But for me, that was a first. I was like, this is amazing. And so I just finished a project where a guy in Washington shot like half the movie. And that's how we did it. I wrote it. He shot basically half stuff. And he would cut it together, cut his parts together, and then he just file transferred it to me. I shot the other half of the movie down here, and then I, chopped it all together, and worked out great. So I've seen a lot of changes, but I am one of those guys. I never cut on film, and so some people give me heat for that. It's like, okay, well, whatever. I just I grew up in the VCR generation, and I didn't go to film school, so I didn't have the opportunity to cut on film. So I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, when I went to college, the Super 8 millimeter, 16. I mean, and it was all set up on the flatbeds, and you had to go the reel to reel, and it was a giant pain in the ass. It looked great, but it was a giant pain in the butt. So, where can people purchase your films? And I got some links from you, so I'll put them down in that little area there for people to click on, but let people know where they can get your stuff.
Yeah. So my site is skullfaceastronaut.com, and that's kind of a hub for everything. But I'm also all over social media. I got Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all kinds of stuff. So I'm, out and about there too. But often I'm pointing back to my site. So I do for fans of physical media, I do DVDs. So I sell DVDs off the site. There's a page where I've got all the stuff available on there. But I also have a Vimeo channel. So a whole bunch of my titles are all available streaming. And again, that's a link on my site to go to the video on demand. So you can just stream it to your device of your choice. I've made some deals with a few different people. David Sterling, Sterling Entertainment. He sells some of my DVDs with alternate artwork. It's the same movie, but it's just an alternate cover. And he has some of my titles on his streaming channel as well. I do have a Drifter out there that on Amazon, and also it's on Tubi right now, and a few other Roku channels. And actually, there's a Roku channel called Fear Flicks that I just made a deal with. I actually have to get some. There's one of my movies on there already, Beyond the Wall of Fear, but there's going to be I think four or six. I can't remember. There'll be some more movies coming on there. I got to get all the deliverables together for them. Anyway, so that's on Roku. Out and about. And then there's also, every once in a while, there's companies that'll want to do like VHS releases, limited edition, like big box clamshell releases of some of my movies. And that's been a lot of fun because usually I design the cover and make it kind of retro. And then I like sign and number the sleeves. It's kind of a little boutique thing. So that happens every once in a while. So yeah, Skullface Astronaut's the main place to go to check out my stuff.
Okay, great. And last question is, would you like to plug anything? It could be past, present, future, whatever you would like to plug.
Well, let me tell you, I made a list. So all right, here it is. You already did one because one of them was going to be Reign of Vibrant Screams, which we already talked about at the beginning. So I got to show it there. Yeah, so I just recently finished another movie for Dave Sterling, Things, 6. So that's a monster anthology that'll be coming out sometime. And I also did, and he already talked about this online. So I did Axe Grinder 3. And that was one of these things that, I know at one point you were talking about ideas. I think it just was he'd been talking about having people do it for a while. And then, COVID hit and everything came to a standstill. And then I was like, well, could we do this? Could we not? Axe Grinder 3 is actually the movie I mentioned where I shot half of it. So Joseph Vogely shot the other half of it.
Oh, okay.
And we just coordinated. You know, I wrote the story kind of knowing that, so it's sort of in pieces, and it's basically like there's one storyline going along, but then we cut back and forth with another one, and that all comes together at the end. So that structure made it possible for him to shoot some stuff and me to shoot some stuff, and then I could weave it all together. So I'm not sure the exact release times on that, but those are done. And then Dark Zone 13 Part 2, I announced at the beginning of the year. So since January, off and on, I've been shooting stories for that. That's another anthology, which is a sequel to my own Dark Zone 13. So this yesterday, I'm so tired I can't keep track of time. Yesterday, I did a big all-day shoot for the last story for that. So there's still editing and sound and music to do, but I think everything is shot for that now. So that's definitely in post. And Dave Sterling did talk about this online at some point. He's going to do a box set of some of my titles, and I'm really excited about that. It'll be on Blu-rays, and he's got an artist doing painted covers, so there'll be all new artwork for them. And he's about halfway done. Takes a long time because they're fully painted covers and they're beautiful, and I can't wait to show it to the world. But yeah, that's in progress. I'm not sure when that'll come out either, but that'll come out at some point. And I got a project for Joseph Vogely. He wants me to be in Specimen 6 Part 2. He said probably next year there'll be some scenes he'll shoot. He wants me in. And then Tanya Atomic, who directed Monos Returns, we're working on a project that might come together early next year as well. So, and who knows what else? That's all the stuff that I've got on my plate. But I always tell people, I said, you know, I say that this week, right? But next week could be different. You know, I'm like, oh man, I don't want to do anything else. And the next week it's like, here's a brand new thing I'm going to do, you know? So you never know, but that's what I got going on. And like I said, if you follow me on Facebook or anything, I'm often posting pictures from these different shoots or artwork or bits and pieces. So that's how you can find out about it.
Right. That's and you brought up Specimen 6, which I'm a big fan of. And
Yeah.
Remember, Joseph, I'll look right into the camera. Remember, Joseph, you said I could have a part in it. So
Yeah,
because that's something I'm hoping for.
I know he's shooting. He plans to just take like a year to shoot it. So I know that, you know, it'll be shot in pieces over a long stretch of time. So he probably just hasn't gotten to your stuff yet. That's all.
Yeah, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, because I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. So, but all right, okay. Well, I've kept you long enough, and I appreciate you being here. So thank you again. Great, I really appreciate it. Yeah. And you know, like I said, I'll put links down below so people can go check out your stuff. I highly recommend it. I own a fair amount of it. I've bought stuff from you. I've bought stuff from David. I bought stuff from you know, SOV Horror. In fact, I just did today because they had that big sale. So I know
I didn't mention that. Yeah, you can. SOV Horror put out these beautiful packages for the first bunch of movies that I made. And so yeah, if you're interested in my early stuff, or even if you like my current stuff, you're like, well, maybe I want to see the weirdo stuff you made when you started, the real shot on video stuff. Yeah. Yeah, SOV Horror put out. I mean, I worked with them. I did new interviews with the cast. I did new commentary tracks, and you know, a few behind the scenes things. So scanned lots of, because they were not, you know, they were photos. They weren't digital. So I did a whole bunch of work gathering all those pieces, and then just the way they put that out is beautiful to have those movies presented with all this extra ancillary stuff. So yeah, SOV Horror, great.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, definitely check them out too. So they're a great company. So lots of good product from them. So, all righty. Well, then I'm going to say goodbye. And once again, thank you, and thank you everybody. Thank you everybody for watching. And
thanks for having me on. And this is a great concept. I really enjoy the episodes you do. It's fascinating.
Oh well, thank you very much. And yeah, these can all be watched on YouTube, and eventually I'll do something on Facebook with it and stuff like that, make it easier for people to find. But thank you. I really do appreciate that. So a lot of talented people on here. I think it's great. So it's normally when I ask somebody, they say yes. Who knew? So I think that's awesome. So yeah. So all right, everybody. Well, I will catch you on the next One Filmmaker, One Film. Until then, I'm John Ward, and I will talk with you later. Where's my hand? There we go. Bye.